Well, good morning, everyone. I am so excited. I have here with me today Christopher Dunn. And Christopher was one of my mentees at an older establishment, another establishment we were at. It's up to Christopher to say what that establishment was if he wants. But he was my mentee in a leadership development program they had at that particular organization. And Chris and I worked together for, I think, a couple of years. And it was
Mhm.
great to see his career just shoot up the ladder and to understand and be able to work with someone. I don't know how long Chris had been out of college at the time, but it was so wonderful to work with Chris. He's great leadership skills. He has innate skills embedded within him as a leader. He then wasn't fearful of developing those skill sets as well. So Chris is here, and I'm going to give Chris an opportunity now to introduce himself a little bit more to you and discuss what he wants to share with you about Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, Dr. Carroll, thank you for having me. So, Christopher Dunn, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Carroll, I don't know, over 10 years ago. So at that time, I was at SunTrust Bank, doing banking before private banking and wealth management. So a couple things about myself. Currently work with ADP as a client success executive, focused on managing relationships and creating successful outcomes. So excited to have a robust discussion, and then of course to share little pieces from my journey, things I think that could be helpful, and then of course any best practices that I've come to pick up over the years, including some nuggets from Dr. Carroll herself during our time together while we were at SunTrust.
All right, that is awesome. And so you are an account executive at ADP.
So success executive. So my primary focus is relationship management. So I work with senior leaders, C-suite executives in order to strategize around their, human capital plans, their objectives, what they want to accomplish, and I think most importantly, ensure that we can achieve them jointly, right? So a lot of collaborative activity, a lot of conversation, dialogue, strategy, and then ultimately working through the actual execution of said strategy. So
Wow.
it is definitely interesting, especially with these times.
Well, oh my gosh. So I would imagine that you do a lot with negotiations both within your organization and with your
Mhm.
clients. Can you share with me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, you're spot on. So I think there's always this like two hats that you wear, right? So, you have the push pull with the client, right? Where you want to first understand what's most important to them. They're considering some of the constraints that we have on our side and trying to find the best outcome. But then the other end of the spectrum, right? Internally, whether you're having to influence product and how it's designed, work through getting additional resources, whether human or technical in nature, to come and try to resolve an issue and try to really make a compelling argument for an outcome. It's always on both sides, kind of trying to create the action that's necessary in order for there to be success, right? And I think that's kind of the unique challenge. And oftentimes it is a negotiation, right? Where, there's 100 things that could be happening and 100 priorities. How do you, make, concessions or deals or considerations or
Wow.
promises or guarantees in order to get what you need from your right side to come over to the left side and vice versa. And I think that's kind of the art that you play in, right? Especially when you're managing relationships. You don't just have this one relationship. It's never a one-to-one. It's kind of, you have something here, over here, and the context around it that you have to navigate. So
Wow.
it makes it interesting.
That sounds great. I mean, I remember working in corporate and the various negotiations that had to go down. You would not think we're on the same playing field. Why do I have to negotiate with you on something? We both understand what the goals are and the mission is. So why do I have to navigate with you on negotiations of why are we going to work this way versus the other? I can show you documentation to prove my point. And I think that the whole thing there was, yes, you can prove a point, but let's balance that with the right
Yeah.
temperature, the right personality being presented at the
Mhm.
table. Sometimes people are fearful when you go in too strong and put everything out up front instead of coasting into the process. And so would you say that it is extremely important to know the person that you're negotiating with on a particular topic, know their wants and their desires, as far as what's going on and how you can meet them somewhere to provide that, but at the same time get what you're looking for from this whole equation?
Absolutely. I mean, it's paramount that there's a deep understanding of whatever partner that you may have. And I'll use that word partner because, this may be a client, it may be their procurement team that you rarely work with, it may be their leader, it may be someone you have a strong relationship, maybe it's not as strong. Then it's also the internal portions, right? And
Mhm.
understanding, at least let's get at like a psychological level, a base level, right? If,
Right.
if you're direct, will they feel attacked? If you're indirect, will they feel like you're not building traction?
Mhm.
Your tone of voice, right? How will that be perceived? Is it considered aggressive? Is it considered not aggressive? What do they prefer? But I think even more than that, right? What's the current climate of the relationship and the operational performance oftentimes, right? Are you delivering on said service? So let's just talk about it from like a technical SaaS, our platform as a service kind of model. Right? Are you delivering or meeting expectations? Or are you not delivering or meeting expectations? Right? So if you're really happy with us and you love us, it's very easy to come in and kind of talk through like, hey, let's evolve, let's adapt. What does the next phase look like? And here's how we can help you go further. If a client's perception is that you are not meeting expectations, then hard to talk about we want to do more for you, right? So
Right.
being able to package that, right? I think that's half the game, right? So being able to package, hey, here's what the client sentiment is, here's the context, and here's some of the minutia that makes it unique, right? We can call it the gravy that makes it unique. And here's how we need to navigate our preparations internally to negotiate meaningfully, right? Now, let's say a negotiation is to renew an agreement or renew a product line or anything in between, right? The time it takes for us to go internally, take all those factors that you just mentioned, Marilyn, which are critically important, and then start to say, okay, here's the approach that we need to have. Here's how we should pull it. Not just what's our back net, right? Like what's our fail safe, but really thinking through, like, hey, here's how we can add value for them that also works for us. And I think that art kind of comes in to where you're now saying, okay, we can not only have a favorable agreement, we can have one that a client or an additional party finds favorable and that the relationship can actually strengthen afterwards, right? Especially when we're looking at relational negotiation and not necessarily like transactional, like, hey, we're going to meet this one time after we conduct this business, then, we may or may not see each other again. But really when we're talking about, long-term relationships and you're in the middle of a negotiation, how can you have all parties have a perception that, hey, we came out in a favorable position? I think that's an art. And context, consideration, sentiment, constraints, all are a critical factor in order to be able to come to that favorable outcome.
Right. I'm just loving these coffee and conversations I'm having with professional individuals like yourself that's also being able to lend your experiences around some of the topics that we're talking about within the academic environment with students. And so they can understand and see from another perspective, things that are happening. So, based on that, in your negotiations and having to deal with various different groups, how do you manage, or what is your advice for if you're that project lead on a particular project and you have to lead the team, which is part of negotiations through
Mhm.
the various, we won't say various, we'll pinpoint something. And so in this particular case, I want to lead the team. I've been assigned to gather all of the success managers, executives together. And I'm responsible for leading this team now to achieve the next level results where we're working with our clients because they're having various challenges with talent. And right now, one of the biggest talent challenges we're having is at this, I think all levels really, but especially the lower to mid levels, we have a lot of people exiting. And specifically, we now have a lot of women exiting the workforce. We have our brain trust exiting in many cases at some of our companies. what do we do? How did you lead a
Mhm.
project team around? Don't you can't. I don't want you necessarily to prescribe a description of what your role would do, because I think that takes a team effort to kind of come around and
Mhm.
build another brain trust around how do we take this and how do we nurture it and
Mhm.
build it into a platform that will now help companies uh, retain talent, or in some cases, if people have decided to exit, how do we build that fresh talent that's there to stay with us for some time?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful question. I think a lot of organizations, from small businesses to the largest of large multinational companies, are grappling with the same type of challenge, right? Especially with, we'll call it, talent mobility that we're seeing right now, where individuals are going, where there's a shortage of talent. Specifically, we'll talk about the U.S. And how to navigate that accordingly, right? I think the first thing that's important is to really identify what are the moments that matter, right, for the targeted group. So what are some leverage points within the system to where we can really look at it and say, how can we make some changes to it? And I think that's a team effort, right? When you have the team kind of come in and have a discussion around, hey, we want to make sure that, we fully understand your experience, right? Let's look through this. A common tool that we use is journey mapping, client journey mapping, but you could even use it internally at your team to really explore what that looks like, right? So, hey, what's the onboarding process look like? Even the offboarding process, because you'd be surprised how much time talent can come back. That was my experience, right? I had left SunTrust, but I ultimately came back. In really identifying what are those moments that matter, what's the current experience, and then what are some of the best practices that you're seeing in the marketplace, or some of these kind of ideal organizations that are able to tackle this challenge on turnover and be able to retain their top talent and then subsequently attract top talent, right? And I think being able to identify that piece, I think that's first and foremost, just from an operational standpoint. It's, let's identify the moments that matter. Let's identify the items that matter, right? And think about what the gaps are, and then we can start to say, hey, we're going to make these appropriate changes for this type of talent. And I think that's a piece. And I think when you have your team involved and engaged with it too, it's almost like you're getting two for one, right? Now they're connected. Now they can speak to it, and they can actually see the outcomes of their not just their feedback, but what they're saying that they want to experience, right? So whether it's kind of going from a policy standpoint, where it's like, hey, we've adopted a different, vacation policy standpoint, a different leave policy, additional accommodations for individuals to have flexible work. We've adopted that because we hear your feedback. It could be that kind of approach. It could be something different where you start looking at either wage or compensation, or it could just be engagement in access, right, within your organization. So once you identify those moments that matter and those leverage points within your system, then you can start to make some tweaks here and there and have your team engaged to where it's a full piece. And I think that's kind of, a foundational step when we're talking about talent retention and workforce management.
Yes. Okay. I hate to put you on the spot on this one, and you don't have to answer if you don't like on this.
All right,
But
go ahead. That's my favorite place to be.
a lot of times, I know when we were at the bank, we were working with trying to make sure, especially our the young talent coming in and the African American talent, especially males, were getting acclimated to the organization the right way, because we didn't see a lot of our people of color, males, really getting assimilated through the organization based on their talent they showed while they're in college or another organization. And so having that talent in a leadership development program and working with them was extremely important. How do we keep and continue to nurture and grow our
Mhm.
male talent that are people of color uh, in these what would you advise from your experiences that has helped you to get to where you are and continuously be that productive uh, uh, individual that has so much talent that you're bringing to the various organizations that you're working with? I know that's a deep question. So, you know, I just think that sometimes talking to people who have been in that spot and who are continuing to grow is the best person to go to ask some questions.
hmm No, I think it's a phenomenal question, and I'll answer it, but I'll answer it in two ways, right? I'll answer what my experience was, how I feel about it, and then I'll come back to what I think could make it work and be more effective. I'm going to be completely candid, and this is going to sound just interesting, but I have no doubt my career was saved at the inception by a handful of individuals.
Wow.
Right. And it's no doubt in my mind. So I first got to the bank. Now, mind you, my mother had worked for the bank over 30 years, got in, personal banker. I was fired up. And I had some challenges when I first came in, right? And it was more relational challenges. It was just challenges when I first came in. And there was a brilliant, marvelous woman, Karen Chevalier. And as luck would have it, she actually worked with my mother many years ago. And then she was the leader for our area, right? She was an area leader, managing multiple branches. And she took the time to just listen to me and ultimately gave me an opportunity. She said, hey, you know what? We want to make sure that you're in a position to where you can thrive and be successful. You can stay at this location, we can move your location, or what would you like to do? And she gave me the opportunity for a choice. But most importantly, she took the time to say, hey, I hear you, and I want to think through this. And ultimately, I made a decision, and that decision was very helpful. And then 5 months later, I was able to produce the results that the organization would want to have produced in a very large way. And she took another risk on me as well. She put me in our third most profitable branch and said, I expect you to be a licensed banker here. And that the rest is history, right? Once I got my licenses at 6 months, then I went into private banking and I started doing Premier and started having wealth clients. And imagine a book that went from 60,000 to 60 million, right? And that one fingerprint really saved my career, because I didn't know if I was going to last 160 or 90 days in that my initial kind of location. It was a struggle for me, and I didn't know how to navigate, and I didn't have a support system, but that was the lifeline, right? And second, it was interesting, and I'll speak about this very candidly, because I could look back and say, I don't think I wanted anything that was deserving, right? But I reached out, and I was like, hey, Mom, I got this degree in psychology. I still care about people, but I'm at the bank. But what can I do? She was like, we have business resource groups, development programs, right? Go reach out. And there was one piece of advice I got from another woman. Her name was Jane Shivers, and she told me, when you go into like a situation or a group, have a heart that wants to help, and just say flat out, like, whatever you need to be done, I will do it. I will help whatever you need. And I reached out to the business resource group that I had connection to just because of my academic background. And I said, hey, I'm willing to do whatever you need to do. I'm not here to ask questions, just how can I help? And that's how I came across you, Dr. Carroll. And that was the accelerator, right? Because it was almost, I had these two paths where there was, hey, I'm getting some skills when it comes to understanding investments, private banking, finance, and I'm gaining those skills through the traditional training programs. But then I found myself in environments that allowed me to have the EP type skills, executive presence, the social skills that really, really hard to come by, and you only get it when you're in that room, right? If you're not in the room, you don't get it. And I found myself in rooms with senior leaders and being able to watch them, see what was effective, see how they navigated. And that gave me a whole new view. And on top of that, I had coaching as well, right? And I think that was the most important part. It's like, I'm in the room, but then afterwards I get direct feedback, like, let's talk about what went well, what changes you could have, and how can you continue to grow. And I think that gave me, and this is years 1 to 3 after school, 1 to 4 after school, that really gave me this foundational kind of, executive confidence, and not just presence, but just state of mind to appreciate these pieces and understand how this business works. And I still feel this way. Banks are very unique because they're very traditional. They're very sophisticated, right? When it comes to decision making, we spend a lot of time, a lot of rigor around these type of things. Everything's a big movement. It's a very large shift. It takes a lot of energy to move a big ship. But those 2-3 pieces, right? Interesting fact, all women really either gave me the skills I needed to progress in my career, or gave me an opportunity to where I can start to grow and thrive. And it made all the difference. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't have this conversation now. I don't know what I would be doing. So that's the first part. That was my experience. Now, how things should be, right? Probably one of the most important pieces when talent comes in is the onboarding process, right? Being made to feel well. And sometimes it's the smallest things, right? I've seen organizations kind of have someone's alma mater kind of put up, right? A big banner, a welcoming, like something around that timepiece that's there. But I think it really has to be some type of a rigor. When someone comes out, they can already have a leadership buddy, right? Even if they're like truly out of school, maybe it's a manager from a different team. Maybe it's a rotational manager program to where, hey, you meet a manager from a new business unit every month. There's a lunch. Doesn't have to be big, but that's your first year. You're just meeting new leaders from across the organization so they can get to know you and you know them. Maybe in year 2, we say, hey, we're signing up with a true mentor, right? What business unit out of all the ones that you've met would you like to learn more about and have a mentor with? Do you have any kind of thoughts? We will set that up for you, right? I think the pitfall that organizations have is, we've come up and some of this is just the general ethos. I'm speaking from a United States perspective, right? It may be different in different regions of the globe. But there's this aspect of go-getters will naturally get better outcomes. And that's true, right? Fortune favors the bold. You got to go out there. You got to seize opportunity. Sometimes that kind of leans towards certain personality types, right?
Yeah.
And there's talent that may not be like assertive when it comes to trying to build a network or go out there, but they are extremely talented, right? That platform doesn't work for them. So if we can, as an organization, right, be able to say, okay, we have a program where we will find you the mentor, we will bring them to you, right? Every employee, right? This is come on in, right? Instead of someone having to go out and request it or go get it themselves, then you have better outcomes. For me, again, I was lucky. It was a little balance between, I was underserving, right? Karen Shabazz was kind enough to see like, hey, the situation is kind of something needs to happen. And she took initiative, right? I went out and kind of, reached out, right? Said, hey, I want to serve. How can I serve? And someone took a risk on me and said, hey, here's an event. Good luck. I want to see the outcome, right? So they took a risk on me. I kind of had to lean into it. But if that didn't happen, again, I wouldn't have had the career acceleration I had. So if an organization can kind of come in and be very deliberate on, hey, we have a lot of new employees coming in. What's their experience? How do we get them buddied? How do they know all about the organization? And think about every employee as like a long-term hire, right? Instead of, hey, we had this direct need, then I think we'll have better outcomes.
Yeah, I think that you make a lot of sense, and because everybody is different, and I'm so into this whole person. I talk about it in learning, but when you're working with, you have a teammate or person on the team, you got to consider that whole person and what's going on with them. I like sports, and I use sports and cooking as analogies of when I'm discussing things or speaking somewhere. And on a sports team, as a coach, I think some of the best coaches understand the same thing I do for Chris is not the same thing I can do for Paul, because Chris is in this particular space. He is a go-getter. But Paul, on the other hand, has some embedded talents, and I know they're there and they can come out, but I need to work with Paul a different type of way in order to get the best on that field from him in the game. And I think that some of the best quarterbacks know that too, and or the GOAT quarterback, he got this. He has this down pat. I know there's a lot of things around him that people don't like, but at the same time, I like that man's leadership skills. I like how he leads on that field, and that's what makes him the GOAT. I like how a lot of the GOATs, the greatest of all times, individuals have proceeded through things because they know how to get more than them working. They're great at what they do, but in order to get the win, they know they can't do it by themselves. And that's the same thing that happens in organizations. I can't do it by myself. I'm good. I'm only as good as I can be with the right backup to take it forward.
It's interesting. I have a counterpoint for you because my thought would be that's a leadership competency, right? The thought process to come in and say, I need to change how I'm teaching my pedagogy, how I'm engaging with, someone who's on my team, that in and of itself is a skill, And that skill has to be acquired and trained and refined, especially as you take on, individuals at different areas of their growth, right? Then you may start having skip levels, right? How you engage that. And it's interesting, what happens when someone has been put into a leadership position or even a senior leadership position where they haven't refined that, right? And sometimes you can have one method and you can really work that one method to success, right? Like, I can go back, I played football in high school, I played in college. And I can remember, there were some coaches that they had their one line, right? And it was, if you messed up, you heard that line. Everybody heard that line. It was always a joke. It was like, oh, you hear that line again, right? We even had one team that was like on our shirts. It was like, mind you, it's a beautiful mantra, right? It's pride, personal responsibility, and daily effort. Phenomenal. But that was the one line, right? And, there was a uniformity thing. Like, you're on a team, you actually you getting closer in cohesion through that one piece. But I think, to your point, when you have leaders who come in and say, hey, I need to engage with this person differently, or I need to pull them, right? And sometimes it's firm, sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's soft. And you play with both hands, I think that's when you get the best outcomes and being able to engage. And again, I tell this story personally because it made all the difference for me. Hearing something direct and feedback and allowing me to chew on it, that worked well for me, right? And I remember, we joke about this from time to time, Dr. Carroll, like, you would be very direct. If it was me and it was bad, you'd be like, that was horrible, right? Here's why. And it gave me the opportunity to reflect and think about it. But that worked for me. And you knew it would work for me. You knew if you pressed the pause button, you just gave it to me straight, I would sit and I would think about it. And then I keep it with me right in the pocket. I still got it 13, 14, 15 years later, stuck in there like, okay, right? But again, that competency to be able to say, hey, I need to engage this person this kind of way. Or even a different type of experience can make all the difference on someone's career. And again, this just goes back to the nuance of managing relationships or managing teams, which is having the awareness and just knowing your clients, knowing your team, you're going to have better outcomes because you can adjust your actions accordingly.
I totally agree. Well, Chris, this has been wonderful. I could talk with you all day. You are just top notch. It is so wonderful to see the growth, and I'm happy that even with my direct talks to you, we're still connected, and that's awesome. That speaks volumes. And you're absolutely right. It really takes, from a leadership perspective, it really takes knowing who you're talking to and knowing what they need. Chris, explain a lot of things to me. I think we got to know, I know we got to know each other before really diving in and talking. I couldn't say those things that I said to you during our mentoring and coaching relationship unless I had gotten to know who Chris is. Who is Christopher Dunn, and what does Christopher Dunn, what is he looking like in the next few years based on comments, direct or indirect comments that he's made to me? And how do we work through this to help him to achieve the goals that he's trying to achieve? And I think that that's what a lot of people in leadership have to keep top of mind, no matter what level you're at in the organization. I was very passionate in my perspective about leadership, and I didn't really need a PhD where I was at the bank. I was my growth was there. I made it there even without a master's degree. But the whole thing was, for me, understanding management and leadership, understanding the financials a little deeper, knowing how to understand leadership even more so. Even with the PhD program, I could have just got a PhD in management and business, but I chose to go deeper, and I wanted to know how organizations needed to structure, how they need to change, what's the culture, how do you change that? And then that wasn't enough. I needed to know everything about leadership, from the times of Socrates and Plato to kings and queens. I needed to know the foundational aspects of that in order to help. And everybody is not like that. And I don't expect them to be like that. But for me, that's what I needed. For you, you needed different things. For anyone that's out there and that's trying to grow, they need various different things that's unique to them and their mindset as to how they need to grow. or that building of a new mindset as to how they need to grow. So every time I got to a corner and I couldn't see around the corner or any further than the edge of that corner, I needed something else to get me to the next corner. And I think that you have
Yeah.
done the same thing. So I thank you so much for this opportunity you've given us today and for my students. And anything else you want to leave with us before we go to our outro?
Hmm. If I had a parting thought, I think would be this, right? Because I think everything that we're talking about is so interconnected, right? Um, I'm going to go back to something that you said before, and you talked about just the fear, right? And sometimes the fear when you're coming into situations, things are challenging, especially things that are ambiguous, or when feelings are very hot, right? Like there's a lot of challenging emotions that you're navigating through it. And one thing I think about in all of these different areas that we talked about today, I think it's courage. And sometimes it's the hardest thing to have, right? But I think that underlying piece will help you navigate some of the most challenging conversations or challenges that any leader or professional will meet, right? So whether it's you're in the middle of a negotiation and it's tense and you're at an impasse, right? Being able to have the courage to be transparent and candid or hold the line, right? Whether you're having a discussion with your team, and maybe you may want to do all the most wonderful things in the world, but you just have natural constraints, and being able to talk and navigate and communicate that in a way to where it's honest and transparent, I think takes courage. Or sometimes doing something that may seem unfavorable, right? Or making requests. They're challenging. We don't want to do it. Oftentimes we want to take the easier route, right? Sometimes the easier route, you win today, but you lose, tomorrow. Really pushing against that. And I think, whether you're in negotiations, whether you're managing teams, whether you're a matrix leader, it doesn't make any difference. If you can act with courage, it'll help you manage better relationships and create better outcomes across the board in any place. So my encouragement would be, as individuals navigate and prepare whatever place they are in a corporate environment or from an entrepreneurial standpoint, take the time to have the courage, assess the situation, think through your own feelings, acknowledge your own fear that you may have, because it's fair. In the Leap 7 book, there's this quote in there, and it was like, just feel the fear and just sit and watch and look and examine. It'll dissipate. And when it dissipates, what you'll find filling that void is that courage to take the appropriate action, even if it's not the most fun or appealing. So that would be my parting thought. It's definitely been an absolute joy. It always is when I get a chance to connect with you, Dr. Carroll. And I just thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Great.
This has been a production of 365 Inspirations, your daily dose of inspiration, with your host, Dr. Marilyn Carroll. Share the good news about our podcast with others. Follow us on TikTok at 365 Inspirations, or at Dr. Marilyn Carroll on Facebook and Instagram, or Twitter at Dr. Marilyn.